on to our speaker. Has anybody been to Lanesboro here? Just about everybody. I was in Lanesboro a couple years ago at the Root on the River restaurant. Have you ever been there?
Yep.
Yep. I'm sitting there with a group of colleagues, and we're talking about character. And David Brooks had just written his book, the Brooks book on character, Road Character. And I had also purchased prior to that time a book by a guy by the name of Fred Kiel, and nationally prominent guy, written up in Harvard Business Review. And as we were discussing prior to the Brooks book, I was mentioning Kiel. And one of the participants at the table there, her name was Bobby Joe Vickerman, who was the city manager, city administrator in Lanesboro, said, I know that guy. He's got a bed and breakfast just down the street here in Lanesboro. So she gets on her cell phone and calls Fred's wife, and they chatted. And Bobby Joe had been a coach of the daughter's volleyball team or whatever. So that was the connection with Fred Kiel. So got to know him, and he came at a future presentation, and within the last several months, thanks to Barb Bergseth, he was the speaker at the Minnesota Council on Character, and he's written this book, and he's loaded with research, well documented, about the linkage between character and bottom line, morale, turnover. He's got a lot of good research, so it's a pleasure for me. And he has been an executive coach for his whole career, much of his career. PhD at the University of Minnesota in psychology, and he's owned his own firm, and he's also a co-author of another book called Moral Intelligence. So he's a tremendous resource, and it's just a great pleasure on my part to have Fred Kiel as our speaker today to share his research and to talk to our group a little bit about character.
Thank you. Thanks, Don. I feel like I've found my people. I've been an optimist all my life. Thank you. I've been alternately praised and criticized for my optimism, but I am also surrounded by optimists. My son-in-law believes he's going to live to be 109. He was told by a psychic when he was 9 years old that he would live to be 109, and he's held on to that belief, and you can't talk him out of it. But actually, in this day and age, with the advances in technology and healthcare, yeah, it might happen. More and more people are living to be over 100. I was thinking about one of my favorite jokes this morning, and many of you might have heard it, about the psychologist that was doing a personality assessment of two little twin boys. And he had a room with a bunch of horse manure and straws stuck in the corner. He brought the first little boy in, and the little boy said, you know, what are you, some kind of a weirdo? And he ran out. So he brought the second little boy in, and he immediately started rummaging through all the manure and the straw. And the psychologist says, wait, what are you doing? He says, with all this manure in here, there's bound to be a pony here somewhere. So that's a real optimist at work. I think I know where my optimism came from. I was sitting talking to my mother when she was 87 years old, and she was in good health but living in a retirement home. And as we were talking, she was saying, you know, most of my friends have passed on. She said, none of my high school classmates are around anymore, and even some of the people that were younger than me that I made friends with have passed. And she kind of paused, and then she thought, she looked at me and she says, you know, when you get to be my age, you probably can't plan on living more than another 10 years. She lived another 5, but I welcome her for my optimism. And I see I need to get something started here. So, So I did a little bit of research on optimism because I wasn't quite sure what the definition was. So the dictionary, it's a person who's inclined to be hopeful and to expect good outcomes. But there are also other benefits of being an optimist. Research shows that optimists live a little longer than pessimists, that they are generally generally happier. They deal with disappointments better than pessimists do, and they live longer, and they're less likely to have major health problems too. So that's all news. I want to tell you about the research that I did on the connection between character and bottom line business results. It started back in the 90s when I began to notice that the executives that I was working with, that the ones that were admired the most by the employees were the ones that were the most honorable. They were the ones with deep character. And I also seemed to notice that I think they got better business results than did the others. One of my clients at that time was a guy named Doug Lennox. He was the head of American Express's financial planning unit, and he was a pioneer. There was about 17,000 financial planners in that business at that time. And he was a pioneer in using emotional intelligence 360 survey as a way of selecting trainees and of developing them. And he said, Fred, he said, I've noticed an interesting thing. He said there tends to be a subset of the trainees that score really high on all the emotional intelligence skills. You know, they're great. They can get your trust. They read your emotions. They are warm and immediately trust them. But they score really low on the integrity scale. He said, what do you make of that? I said, well, I think you found a way to identify the con artists that are out there. Because if you think about that, that's what a con artist does, is they can make you feel comfortable and gain your trust. So we started talking about the emotional intelligence model, and we came to the conclusion that there was a deeper form of intelligence that is underpinning emotional intelligence, and that's something that we decided we would call moral intelligence. And we did a lot of research. We consulted all of the literature on ancient philosophy and modern philosophy and theories of moral development and evolutionary psychology and all of these fields, including the neurosciences. And we thought that we were justified in claiming that leaders who are highly principled, they're people that if you think of somebody in your life that you really trust and admire for their character, why do you do that? I bet it's because they do four things. One is that you can depend on them to tell the truth and keep their promises. Secondly, they have a certain humility. They own up to their own mistakes and are quick to assume that maybe there's something they don't know. Third, they are quite forgiving when somebody else makes a mistake. They don't shame and blame the person. They are curious. And fourth, they treat you like a human being, not a number. So if you think about that as how you make the judgment about whether or not to trust somebody, it seemed to us that those are the characteristics that are the best for leaders to show. And so we asserted in this book that leaders who honor those four moral principles, actually, it's integrity, responsibility, forgiveness, and compassion, that they, in fact, will get better business results than leaders that don't. And the first book came out in 2005, and it was a big success, continues to be a pretty big success. It's in 8 other languages and continues to sell. But about 6 months after it came out, a reviewer called me up and he said, Fred, he said, I know you like all this soft stuff. He said, I'd expect you to, you're a psychologist. But he said, let me give you a little lesson in economics. He said, what really creates value into the bottom line is the business model. He said, if you have a great business model, you'll make a ton of money and you'll be able to afford all the best talent and all of that. And he said, all that culture stuff that you think is so important about character, he said, it's nice to have, don't get me wrong, but he said, it's not really a big factor. He said, as long as management stays legal, he said, that's all that's really is needed. And, well, that kind of threw me for a loop. And then he said, I read your book. He said, you and Doug make some nice claims there, but you don't have any data to support that. All you did was talk to about 100 people that agreed with you. And he was right. We didn't have any data. So for the next 2 weeks, I was pretty despondent because I thought if I devoted my whole career to this point to to doing something that's sort of icing on the cake. It doesn't really matter about character habits. And then I started thinking, no, my experience says that character is a significant factor in creating value, and the only way to counter this argument is to go out and get data. Now, at the point, that book came out in 2005, that reviewer's point of view was pretty much the accepted point of view in Wall Street and other places, is that as long as you stay legal, that's all that matters. And what really drives the bottom line and brings a lot of profitability in is the business model and this strategy and all the stuff they teach you in business school. That who you are isn't all that important as long as you don't steal. And everybody agreed that low character erodes value, but there was no agreement that strong character was anything other than nice to have. So we set out on a research study that turned out to be 7 years. I thought it was going to be 2 or 3, and that's kind of the downside of optimism. But over the 7 years, we enrolled 121 CEOs and their senior teams into the study. We started out, the very first one was the Costco Corporation. Jim Sinegal is the founder. He's now retired, but he was the CEO at that time. And he just leaned right into this and served as our first pilot project for the study. Because what we were trying to do is figure out how can you measure something as elusive as character. Because when you think about character, you probably think, that's really personal. That's in my heart, it's my beliefs, it's my intentions. And that's true that it is. But how you judge character is by people's behavior. So we settled on the idea that you don't have to measure character per se, you can measure the expression of character. You can measure how often do people tell the truth by surveying their employees. How often do they keep their promises? You know, how often do they own up to their own mistakes? All of that. So we set out to do that, and we collected that data on 84 CEOs, and we ended up with over 8,500 employee surveys on these 84 CEOs of the company. So a big database. Next slide. See, these are the 4 principles that we use to define character, and we got these out of the field of cultural anthropology. When you look at cultural anthropology, the cultural anthropologists have spent their recent years in studying what do human societies have in common all across the world, whether they're in Asia or South America or North America, wherever. And they published a professor in this field published a book called Human Universals, and what it is really a sort of an encyclopedia of the beliefs and practices that all cultures in the world have in common. And it turns out that all parents in the world teach their kids these 4 moral principles. They teach them to tell the truth, keep their promises. They teach them to own up for their own mistakes. They teach them to have forgiveness and compassion for the others. So these are really human universals. You know, it used to be the thought that human baby is born as sort of a blank slate, and that was the predominant belief among neuroscientists and psychologists, and even in the 90s. And today the accepted belief is that human babies are incredibly wired to cooperate, to connect with others, to have emotional relationship with others. In fact, you know, the worst thing you can do to another human being is keep them from connecting with others. That's why it's such a tragedy that we have so many people in this country that are in solitary confinement, because it's a form of torture for people. But human babies are really wired to connect. It's in our DNA to be very cooperative and to connect with each other. So it's some sort of interesting side benefits or side information on that is that the human Homo sapiens, as we are called, are the only sort of mammal that has this capacity to cooperate with people that you don't know. Chimpanzees can cooperate with each other, but they got to know the other chimpanzee, and they can only know maybe 100 to 150 other chimpanzees. if you put, say, 350 chimpanzees in an airplane and to cross the ocean, by the time you got to New York, there probably would be 2 of them left alive. But we routinely put 350 to 500 humans in the strangers, and nobody gets killed. It's because it's in our DNA to be able to cooperate and to trust. It's in our wiring to trust other people, even people we don't know. So because of this, we were able to come up with this index called character index. Turned out we started out with 65 behavioral descriptors in those 4 areas, and we ended up, research showed that we only needed 25 of them to come up with a valid character score. So we did that. Next slide. We did that on all of those 84 CEOs, and it turned out that there was a nice spread. The character score we converted to a scale from 0 to 100, so the ones up at the top of the curve, they scored in the high 80s and low 90s, and ones at the bottom of the curve scored around 50, which is to say that their employees said that they show these principles about half the time. They tell the truth. About half the time they own up to their own mistakes, that sort of thing. Whereas the CEOs at the top of the curve in their senior teams, the employees said, oh, they always tell the truth. We love working at this place. They were just, outstanding in terms of how people felt about working for them. They'd walk through walls for them. So there were 10 of those that we identified at the top character scores, and we ended up calling them the virtuoso CEOs. And those at the bottom of the curve we described as self-focused. Now, they weren't bad people. They were just people that had a different view of life. They were not optimists. In fact, they suspected their predominant belief, expectations of other people is that you have to watch people very carefully or they will steal you blind. I mean, you have to, it's sort of the attitude, the management attitude. And of course, when people feel that way, it isn't really very motivating to them. We also asked all the employees that we surveyed, we asked for a random sample of 300 employees from each company, and we asked each of them, along with these rating surveys, to answer a bunch of other questions about based on his behavior, what do you think the CEO believes about the world? And those are the self-focused ones. They came out that their behavior suggests that the thing that drives them is their own financial security and their own family, and it's not us, and it's not leaving the world a better place at all. Whereas those at the top, it was just exactly the opposite. They would punch every item on the Optimist creed here today. They were people that had a positive view of human nature. They expected people to be their best. People were trusted until they proved they couldn't be trusted, and then there was probably a desire to try to help them learn how to be trusted. And they were all about leaving the world a better place. It was not about their own financial security. And of course, the paradox is the virtuosos in the end made tons more money for themselves than did the self-focused ones. So the results were really interesting. Show the next. So we gather financial data on these companies. And to my delight, the virtuoso CEOs brought nearly 5 times more to the bottom line and bottom line hard profitability than did the self-focused CEOs. Now, the self-focused CEOs were not unsuccessful. They were bringing in an average of a little under 2% of return on assets to the bottom line, but the virtuosos were bringing in an average of 9.35%. Now, that's not 5% better. That's almost 500% better. And there was no other way to explain these results. We collected a lot of other data on all these CEOs. We interviewed them about their life history. We asked them about their political and religious practices, political beliefs, and all of that. We knew their entire childhood history down. We knew how long they'd worked, their career history. So we sorted the data based on education. Does an MBA give you an edge? Sorry, it doesn't. There was no differences in terms of the bottom line profitability for those that had advanced degrees from those that had either, some of them didn't even graduate from college that were in the sample. So then we sorted on tenure. Surely the older, more experienced CEOs would have an edge in bringing more profitability to the bottom line. There was, the oldest CEO was 74 and the youngest was 32. And again, we sorted on it and there was no differences there. Same for any of the other variables that we collected. You'd think that maybe the virtuosos came from all these wonderful families where they were, you know, like Leave It to Beaver kind of homes, and that the self-focused had really troubled homes when they grew up. There were some differences there, but three of the virtuoso CEOs came from terribly dysfunctional homes. One had been put into a what do you call it? Well, not a foster care, the adoption, or foster care kind of thing. Well, they used to have names for that in the 30s, but it was orphanage, right. His father had died and his mother had 5 small children. She just couldn't take care of them all, so and that was before there was any kind of safety net in this country, and so she put him and his sister into an orphanage, a Catholic orphanage. And 5 years later, he got out because she remarried and found a man that had the means to help her support her children. But, you know, he had that kind of history. Well, that was Jim Senegal from Costco that had that history. Jim was a very remarkable man. I really enjoyed the time I spent with him. He was given an honorary degree by the University of San Diego in California at one point. He had not graduated from college, and his remarks when he was presented the award was, he said, "Gosh, you folks kind of went overboard." He said, "I would have been happy to have a C in accounting." But he was a guy that punched all the ticket on those four principles. He was very clear. His whole message to his management team and workforce was that how you treat members is how we treat you is how you will treat members, and therefore, for warehouse managers, get it out of your head that you're an actual manager. What you are is a provider of resources and training and encouragement and support for people. Because how you treat the cashiers is how they will, in turn, treat the members. Are any of you members of Costco here? Okay. I don't know, but I have not found anyone yet who's had a really bad experience going to Costco. Even men like to go there. I think it's probably because of the food at the end of the aisles. But there's a nice energy when you walk into a warehouse. People are friendly, all that. I've made it as sort of a hobby to try to find a disgruntled Costco employee. And I've been doing this for a number of years now, so I've got a lot of them that I have talked to. And your conversation usually goes like this, you know, the checkout clerk or somebody, warehouse worker. "How long you work at Costco?" "Oh, 5 years, 4 years, whatever." "How do you like it here?" "Oh, I love it." "What do you love about it?" "Well, you know, pay and benefits is really good, and Costco closes on holidays so that I can have time with my family and all that." And I say, "Well, that's good. Anything else that you like about Costco?" And they always then ponder and they say, "Well, yeah, my manager's great. She's got my back," or I really trust my boss and all that. So I have yet to find somebody that whines about having a bad boss at Costco. And that's because that's just part of that culture. And that culture comes from the top of Costco. When Costco was started in 1985, if you had invested $100 in it at that time, you'd have well over 10,000 or 100,000, I think, by now. I mean, it's just been one of the great investment successes around. They started out with a plan to have 20 warehouses, and at this point they have over 700. They are the world's second largest retailer, second only to Walmart in terms of, they're a lot smaller than Walmart, but and of course their only true competitor is Sam's Club. And I don't know if anybody is ever thrilled to go to a Sam's Club. I haven't found that person yet, but I'm kind of biased. But Jim Senegal is kind of my hero. The other interesting thing was that the virtuosos enjoyed a lot higher level of workforce engagement. All the open-ended comments that that people made about what it feels like to work in the organization were all very positive on the part of the virtuosos. I look forward to coming to work. It's great. My manager treats me terrifically, all those kind of things. And those at the bottom of the curve, the self-focused workforce open-end comments were how painful it is to work here, and I can't wait to find another job, and I wish I'd never come to this company, and all of that kind of thing. So they, obviously, the self-focused people were creating very painful work environments. And then the other kind of really amazing interest, or point of interest, is that there was a lower level of corporate risk for the virtuoso-led companies. There were fewer lawsuits. There was a lower level of audit fees associated with virtuoso CEOs, and just in general, better accounting reports. We know this because we had a joint research project with Duke University, an accounting professor at Duke, who studied all of this and then cross-validated with our data, and it came out that he had an interesting way of going about that. He used linguistics to analyze letters to shareholders and to see if virtuoso CEOs used different words than did the self-focused ones, and he found that self-focused, there was a big difference, and he found that the self-focused leaders used a lot of words that he calls sort of the cause-related ones. They're words that allow you to waffle and to kind of leave loopholes open so you can explain away results and unpleasant data. So anyway, you would think that these people would be really aware of what their character reputation is, but next slide will show you that. Next, punch it again. This will show you the self-ratings of the virtuoso CEOs and the self-focused ones. So you see that they're kind of all over. There's one poor virtuoso guy down near the bottom that rates himself as being pretty unprincipled. So much for self-awareness. Now, in the next slide, we'll show you what happens when you take the employee ratings into account. Huge difference between them. So as it turns out that people don't rate themselves very accurately at all. You know, probably everybody in this room thinks that you're an above average driver. Well, you can't be. And our research shows that 7 out of 10 people don't very accurately assess what their real character reputation is. We've created this assessment tool now. We do it in our work with companies. So when we start working with a company, we ask for employees to rate the character habits of the senior team and the team leader, CEO or team leader. And 70% of those reveal a significant gap compared to what the self-assessment is, senior team. Well, that kind of makes sense. I mean, we all like to think the best of ourselves, and this is where optimism may not serve you so well if you think you're a lot better than you actually are, but there's about 70% that don't get that right. And when we showed the results to the self-focused leaders down at the bottom of the curve, they were horrified to find out that they were viewed as people that lie and have only their self-interest at heart, and treat people disrespectfully and all of that. So they were really totally unaware of that. Well, it turns out that how you deal with other people are called character habits, and they are habits. You don't stop to think any more about whether or not you're going to tell the truth than you think about putting your foot on the brake at a stop sign. It's an automatic response for a strong character person, as I tell the truth. I keep my promises. I own up to my own mistakes. I treat other people with care and respect and compassion and that sort of thing. So because these are our character habits, habits can be changed. They can be modified, they can be strengthened, they can be replaced. It's not easy, and New Year's resolutions, willpower doesn't work, but the whole field of neuroscience has come up with pretty clear understanding of how you can go about changing your habits. There's a book that's called The Power of Habit that's pretty impressive if any of you want to read on it. You can go to YouTube and see YouTube videos on it. There's one called Tiny Habits. It's another kind of good way. But so we do a lot of work with companies now on helping senior teams elevate their character habits, the ratings. And when they are able to do that, then it gets, sure enough, gets translated to better business results and bottom line, more higher retention, etc. One more slide on the self-assessment. This is how the virtuoso leaders rated themselves. Next, punch it again. And that's how the employees rated them. So, oh no, that's the self-focused ones. They rated themselves 1 point separate from the virtuosos. So they had all 84, or all 10 and 10, and those two groups rated themselves very highly. Here's how the employees rated the virtuoso leaders. They actually rated them 3 points higher than they rated themselves. And here next is how employees rated the self-focused ones. So really hard evidence of the difference between the two. Next slide. You know, we live in a time of great challenges right now. 10 years ago, we were sort of thinking we're on top of the world and everything is great, and then the financial collapse happened in 2007 and 8, and that really kind of disillusioned a good part of the world. And I think we're seeing that expressed today in our politics and all that. But there are other things that are happening in addition to disillusionment. There's the biotech and infotech disruption. I would guess that probably none of you in this room will escape the impact of digital disruption on your business or your job within the next 5 years, probably. It's coming at an incredible rate. Everything from driverless cars to the merging of information technology and biotechnology and nanotechnology, incredibly far-leading things are happening in the world of medicine. And of course, we've got the driverless cars and trucks that are coming. You know, it's already proven that driverless cars would, if the whole society was using driverless cars, would result in 90% fewer accidents than humans driving cars. Humans are subject to distraction, they're subject to emotional distress, they're subject to sleepiness and all of this kind of thing. There are 1.2 million people that are killed in traffic accidents around the world every year. I mean, and you know, if there were that many people that were killed in airplane accidents, we'd be up in arms. Airplanes learned how to use computers because they started out and everybody accepted the level of danger. And you know, back in the 60s, it was a little scary sometimes, you know, because probably every other month an airliner somewhere in the world went down and people were killed. You haven't heard of an airliner going down now in a long, long time. I mean, it just doesn't happen much anymore because computers have enhanced human operations. Actually, the only reason that pilots or humans have to do anything on flying in a jetliner now is on landing. They don't have to do anything on takeoff or anything else until they land, and that's because of airport regulations. Won't allow it if you have computers to land it. But the airplanes are totally capable now from taxiing and taking off and flying and landing without having anybody in the cockpit. Now, of course, we will never allow that to happen, at least not in the near future, because there's not that much trust yet in computers. Well, the same with driverless cars, as there has to be trust in driverless cars. Their problem is that they need about 500 million miles of test data in order to get to the level of safety that where there's almost no accidents, which is what humans would expect now of driverless cars. And they've only got collectively about 50 million miles of data now in their computers for artificial intelligence to operate. So artificial intelligence is the big thing that's coming. It's going to impact jobs in a big way. More or fewer. Nobody knows. There's opinions on both sides of the table. But it's kind of hard to imagine the 55-year-old truck driver who is put out of work is suddenly able to transform and become, a high-tech computer job person or whatever the job would be. And then there's the possibility of great inequality happening from who controls the data tends to be the ones that have the most power. So will we allow that to be in the hands totally of the elite, the big corporations, or will we be smart enough to pass regulations requiring that all the data that Facebook and Google and everybody else collects is really public data? It should be open source and open to everybody. That's the only guarantee that we would have, that we won't have a small elite control all of the data. And this is thinking ahead, 10, 20 years from now, but it's coming faster than you think. I really recommend this author, Yuval Harari. He's written 3 books. This is his latest book called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. It's sobering, but there's also glimmers of hope for optimism in it. And the downside of optimism that I've been criticized for in the past by some people is being unrealistic and not being grounded in data and facts. I don't think I am. I just think that I am able to see more than just the negative side of facts. This book is a really good grounding in reality, but it's not devoid of optimism either. So I think it would be an excellent book for you to read. So next slide. The vision for Optimists International is to be recognized worldwide as the premier volunteer organization that values all children and helps them to develop to their full potential. And what we found in our research is that the virtuoso CEOs, want to do next slide, had 8 out of the 10 virtuoso CEOs had one or more influential adults in their life. The self-focused ones only 2 of them had one or more. So it's pretty clear. The self-focused were basically people that were loners. They didn't trust. They didn't have an influential adult like an aunt or an uncle or a teacher or a parent or anyone else that was really focused on helping them. So our job as adults in this world is to make sure that we spend time encouraging children and helping them, being their advocate, their partner, their mentor. Kids yearn for that, and they want it. And I know that that's the mission and the purpose of Optimists International. So it should be a natural for you to go to that and to do that. But I really highly recommend that you do it, because that's what produces the leaders that we want in the future and all of that. And you're doing. She's sitting by the table with me, and she's teaching character classes in school to kids. So all these things coming together is what's going to leave the world a better place. So with that, I'll hang it up. Thank you. Sorry? Sure. Any questions? Yeah. Built to Last was a good book that was written probably 20, 25 years ago now. That's the Jim Collins book, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, Jim Collins talked about level 5 leaders. And when you look at level 5 leaders, they were very much the virtuoso leaders in our book. Now, he didn't have any data. In fact, he stated explicitly in his book that the level 5 leaders are these marvelous, get these great results. Idea how they became that way or who they really are, but they are. So that's the kind of the black box that then we exposed. Well, here's who they are. Yeah. Well, being in the research study was not to help them change. I mean, they gave us data, and all that we did was go back to them and have a meeting where we showed them the data and gave them a nice written report. They reacted in various ways to that report. A couple of them were very unhappy with it. One of them practically escorted me from his office. Incidentally, his firm was acquired and broken up in the 2007 financial crisis. But but they were all distressed by the data, and they reacted in various ways. And I think some of them probably used it to make some improvements, but we didn't follow up on them, so we don't know. Yes?
Do you know if there's been any study on, are they changeable, the self-focused ones?
Well, our consulting firm works now with big companies across the world, and we certainly find teams that we start out with that have a bad character reputation, and if you approach them in the right way and practice these principles ourselves so that we don't punish them and shame them and blame them and all of that, and connect with their hearts, they really want to, everybody, we have yet to counter, maybe one of the self-focused ones was sort of, I don't care, my dad was a son of a bitch and so am I, and that's, live with it. But the other 9 of the self-focused ones really wanted to change. They didn't want to be seen that way. So when you provide compassion and love to, we don't use the word love, but that's what it is, to somebody that's got a low score and help them, they all want to change. And there's a real science now in how helping people change, and it works. Yes?
Have you ever expended any of your research to public sector and public organizations?
Not political ones. The 84 firms in there included some big nonprofits, and one governmental agency was in there, a state government agency, but we don't wade into the whole political climate these days because it's, I won't wade into it.
Any correlation with personality, Myers-Briggs?
We didn't have any question about correlation with personality. We didn't have personality measures on them, but we had tons of other data, and this is not related to personality, because the question I have about personality is, if you know your Myers-Briggs type, how many of you here know your Myers-Briggs type? Okay. Do you know how many people are in prison with your type? Now, if you got a high score on our character scale, you won't find anybody with a character score of 88 that's in prison. Yes?
In your book, you talked about your parents having a big influence on your morals.
Yeah.
When you sort of kind of talked about how you changed
Mm-hmm.
with your life, what influenced you to make that change?
Well, I don't know how many of you heard the question. She wondered about my personal history that I write about in the introduction and all of that. So you're asking me to bare my soul now, so I'll do it. I grew up in a home where, my parents weren't perfect, but they were pretty principled people, and they taught me to be that way. And I can remember dinner discussions. My dad was a cattle rancher, farmer. I remember dinner discussions where he'd be talking about other people, and there was 1 or 2 people in our community that were sort of, would match the self-focused kind of profile. And my dad always summed up that person as having a big hat but no cattle. And so I got out of graduate school, and I think I was fairly principled at that time, but somehow or other I got focused on the greed age and the opportunity to make a lot of money. So when I was in my early 40s, I decided that was my primary goal, was to make a ton of money. And so at that time I had a pretty large clinical practice in the Twin Cities market, 5 or 6 offices, and did a public offering. It raised a little over $1 million on a public offering, so that now I was a publicly held company and traded in the local over-the-counter market. And our job, our vision for the company was to get managed care contracts, behavioral health contracts across the country, to build a national system of delivering behavioral health problems across the country. Well, it was underfunded, and I had big dreams, and they were too big. But I was also kind of a jerk. I know what was in my heart at that time, and I was out to make money. And the people that worked for me and my management team were basically, tools for me to use. I wasn't really concerned about them and their future and all of that. Coinciding with that, about that time, I was at a party where a friend of ours that graduated from or had gotten past the bar exam, and he had a big party. And at the end of the day, end of the night, everybody else was left. There were one other couple that was there. And so the three couples, we sat down in his library and started visiting, and after 2 or 3 glasses of wine, for whatever reason, the subject came up about the sex lives of Victorian women. Well, being a psychologist, I assumed that I knew a lot about that, especially after 3 glasses of wine. And, and the guy that was this other couple, he kept challenging me, and he says, well, have you read this book? Have you read that? And of course, he'd read them all, and I realized then that I'd been had and exposed, and I stopped and I said, what do you do for a living? He says, oh, I'm a Lutheran pastor. It stunned me. He had all but a PhD in philosophy, and he had a master's degree in divinity from Yale, and he was no dummy. But he was a very kind, loving, compassionate man, and he and his wife kind of loved me and my family back into a church life. And about 1.5 years after that was when I was experiencing this business was failing. This publicly held company of mine was failing. And Paul suggested that I attend a weekend conference on a spiritual retreat for men. It was called Kiel. I don't know how many of you have heard of that in this room. So I thought, do you think? No, do you really know me? That doesn't interest me. But he convinced me, so I went. And, Friday morning, the first lecturer got me, because the first lecturer asked us all to rate, rank order, how important God, our job, our career, and our family were to us. So I put God number 1, because I'd been going to church for 1 year. And I put my family number 2, and then I put my job number 3. And then he, of course, got us. And he said, now take out your checkbook and your calendar, and how are you spending your resources and money and time? And of course, how that came out is my career was getting 99%, God was maybe 0.5%, and my wife and kids were 0.5%. And as the weekend evolved, I just was horrified at the person I had become. And I realized that I was the guy with the big hat and no cattle. I had a red Cadillac and I had a diamond ring, which I didn't keep very much long after that, but anyway, I came home and sat on the bed and talked to my wife, and the whole experience of that just sort of came in on me, and I just broke down and sobbing, and that's when I had the most dramatic spiritual experience of my life. I kind of felt as if there was a collar around my neck that was suddenly released, and I was saved in that sense. And over the next year, well, then I was fired by the company that I had founded, which brought a certain amount of reality into place. But then this is when I started the current consulting practice that I have. And within 1 year had really settled in on the purpose of my life is to help connect the heads to the hearts of leaders in large organizations, because that'll be better for all of us. And that's what I've been doing since. And 78 years old and don't have enough sense to quit, because it still is passionate. So thank you for the question.